Our conversation about Martin Heidegger's Metaphysics. We lie in the pincers, our people, as standing in the center experiences the most intense pressure, our people. The people, richest in neighbors and hence the most endangered people, and for all that, the metaphysical people. We are sure of this vocation, but this people will gain a fate from its vocation only when it creates in itself a resonance, a possibility of renaissance for this vocation, and grasps its tradition creatively. All this implies that this people, a historical people, must transpose itself and with it the history of the West, from the center of the future happening into the originary realm of the powers of being. Precisely if the great decision regarding Europe is not to fall upon the path of annihilation. Precisely then can this decision come about only through the development of new, historically spiritual forces from the center. Okay, so spiritual forces. Let's highlight that. Spiritual forces. He's going to enlighten us on this, I suppose. To ask, how does it stand with being? This means nothing less than to repeat and retrieve. Wiederholen in German. The inception of our historical spiritual Dasein, in order to transform it into the other inception. Such a thing is possible. It is in fact the definitive form of history, because it has its onset in a happening that grounds history. But an inception is not repeated when one shrinks back to it as something that once was, something that by now is familiar and simply to be imitated, but rather when the inception is begun again more originally, and with all the strangeness, darkness, insecurity that a genuine inception brings with it. Repetition as we understand it is anything but the ameliorating continuation of what has been, by means of what has been. The question, how does it stand with being, is included as a prior question in our guiding question. Why are there beings instead of nothing? If we now set out to pursue what stands in question in the prior question, namely being, then Nietzsche's saying as once proves to be completely true after all. For if we look closely, what more is being to us than a mere locution, an intermediate meaning, intangible as vapor? Nietzsche's judgment, of course, is meant in a purely dismissive sense. For him, being is a deception that never should have happened. Being, intermediate, evanescent as vapor? It is in fact so, but we don't want to evade this fact. To the contrary, we must try to get clear about its faculty in order to survey its full scope. Through our questioning, we are entering a landscape. To be in this landscape is the fundamental prerequisite for restoring rootedness to historical Dasein. Okay, so questioning and entering into the landscape of conversation is going to be the necessary prerequisite for us to restore the roots that were historical to Dasein. We gotta annotate that. We will have to ask why this fact, the fact that being remains a vaporous word for us, stands out precisely today. We will have to ask whether and why it has persisted for a long time. We should learn to know that this fact is not as innocuous as it seems at first sight, for ultimately what matters is not the word being, remains just a noise for us as it means a vapor, but that we have fallen out of what the word is saying, and for now cannot find our way back. It is on these grounds, and on no others, that the word being no longer applies to anything. That everything, if we merely want to take hold of it, dissolves like a shred of cloud in the sun. Because this is so, we ask about being, and we ask because we know that truths have never yet fallen into people's lap. The fact that even now one still cannot understand this question and does not want to understand it, even if it is asked in a still more originary way, takes from this question none of its inevitability. So in 1 minute he's telling us that, Nietzsche is correct for accusing the word being as meaningless as vapor, and that it kind of remains just a noise, but that on those grounds, of course it would mean that, but that because we ask, it's still more of an original way to take from this question, and then to ask in that way is inevitable. Okay. Of course, one can show oneself to be very clever and superior, and once again trot out the well-known reflection. Being is simply the most universal concept. Its ranges extend to any and everything, even to nothing, which is as something thought and said. It is also something. So there is, in the strict sense of the word, nothing above and beyond the range of this most universal concept being, in terms of which it could be further defined. One must be satisfied with this highest generality. The concept of being is ultimate. Okay, so being is the ultimate concept. Like Brahma? That would make sense in that theological way, but you see, he's saying here, 1 minute he's saying that being is, and that it can be defined in a sense, and he's saying it's the ultimate, but then above he says that it's a vaporous word. So he seems to be going back and forth between how people can understand being. He seems to be struggling it with himself within the text. What could be more comprehensive than the concept of being? What could be more comprehensive than the concept of being? The more intermediate and empty is its content. So he just told me it was comprehensive, now he's telling me it's empty. Sometimes Heidegger just kind of rambles on. For every normally thinking human being, and we all want to be normal, such trains of thought are immediately and entirely convincing. But now the question is whether the assessment of being as most universal concept reaches the essence of being. Hold on, let's repeat that. But now the question is whether the assessment of being as the most universal concept reaches the essence of being, or whether it so misrepresents being from the start that questioning becomes hopeless. So our questioning needs to be whether if it's if we misinterpret it, it's hopeless. So we have to assess it as the most universal concept so that it reaches the ultimate essence, and so then that way we will truly understand being. Okay. The question is whether being can count only as the most universal concept that is unavoidably involved in all particular concepts, or whether being has a completely different essence, and thus is anything but the object of ontology, if one takes this word in established meaning. The term ontology was first coined in the 17th century. It designates the development of the traditional doctrine of beings into a philosophical discipline and a branch of philosophical system. But the traditional doctrine is the academic analysis and ordering for Plato and Aristotle, and again for Kant, was a question, thought to be sure a question that was no longer originary. The word ontology is still used this way even today. Under this title, philosophy busies itself with the composition and exposition of a branch within its system. But one can also take the word ontology in the broadest sense without reference to ontological directions and tendencies. In this case, ontology means the effort to put being into words, and to do so by passing through the question of how it stands with being, not just with being as such, but because until now this question has found neither an accord nor even resonance, but instead is explicitly rejected by the various circles of academic philosophical scholarship. Why does he always have to bring in other people to make his point? Brings in Plato, Aristotle, Kant, and Nietzsche. Why can't he just tell me what he views it? So now he's arguing with the way ontology is used today versus how he means ontology to be in the broadest sense. And that in his case, ontology is to put being into words, and it's not just the question of being. We're going to see where he takes us in later videos. But what do you think, family? How do you view ontology? Would you view it as the traditional way of the question, or by putting ontology into words, and that by putting it through the words, and that's how it will connect with being, and not just beings as such? So the process versus the question. Very interesting.